Princess Isabella's hands trembled as she stared at the ivory silk pooling at her feet. The fabric was unmistakable, even in the dim light of Lady Catherine's private wardrobe. Golden thread caught the afternoon sun streaming through the narrow window, revealing the royal crest embroidered across the bodice. This was her grandmother's coronation gown. The same dress Queen Margaret had worn 40 years ago when she took her sacred oath. The same gown that should have been locked away in the royal treasury, preserved behind bulletproof glass for the nation to admire. Yet here it was, crumpled behind Lady Catherine's evening dresses like a discarded costume. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. She had only entered this chamber because Lady Catherine's maid asked her to retrieve a shawl for the afternoon tea. A simple favor, nothing more. But now she stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs as questions flooded her mind. How did this get here? Why would anyone hide it? And most terrifying of all, what would happen if she told anyone what she had found? The palace had been strange since her grandmother's death 6 months ago. Queen Margaret had ruled with grace and wisdom for nearly 5 decades, beloved by her people and respected across the world. Her passing left a wound in the kingdom that had not yet healed. Princess Isabella, only 23 years old, still wept when she passed her grandmother's portrait in the East Wing. The old queen had raised Isabella after her parents died in a tragic accident when she was just 7. Margaret was not just her queen, but her mother, her teacher, her everything. Then came the wedding. King Edward, Isabella's uncle, had married Lady Catherine just 3 months after the funeral. The speed shocked the nation. Whispers filled the palace halls about the unseemly haste, the lack of proper mourning. But King Edward insisted the kingdom needed stability, needed a queen consort to help guide him through these troubled times. Lady Catherine was beautiful, charming, and came from a respected noble family. The public tried to accept her, even as their hearts still ached for Queen Margaret. Isabella never trusted her. From their first meeting, something felt wrong. Lady Catherine's smile never reached her eyes. Her kindness seemed practiced, rehearsed. She asked too many questions about palace traditions, about where treasures were kept, about who had access to what. Isabella dismissed her concerns as grief, as the natural suspicion of losing someone so dear and watching another take her place. But now, standing in this wardrobe with her grandmother's most sacred garment, hidden like stolen goods, Isabella knew her instincts had been right. She bent down and lifted the gown carefully. The weight of it surprised her. The coronation dress was not meant for comfort, but for ceremony, laden with pearls, diamonds, and historical significance. Every queen for 300 years had worn a variation of this design. Queen Margaret's version was the most elaborate, commissioned by the finest seamstresses in the realm. The train alone stretched 15 feet, embroidered with the names of every monarch who came before her in gold threads so fine. It looked like spider's silk. Isabella's fingers traced the delicate stitching. She remembered the day of the coronation. She had been just a child, but the memory remained vivid. Her grandmother standing tall and regal as the archbishop placed the crown upon her head. The way the gown seemed to glow in the cathedral's light. The tears streaming down Margaret's face as she swore to serve her people with every breath in her body. That oath was sacred. This gown was sacred. And now it was here, hidden away like something shameful. A floorboard creaked behind her. Isabella spun around, still clutching the gown, her heart leaping into her throat. Lady Catherine stood in the doorway, her face pale and eyes wide. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The silence stretched between them like a drawn blade.
Your Highness,
Lady Catherine finally said, her voice carefully controlled. I did not expect you in my chambers. Isabella's mind raced. She could lie, could pretend she had not seen anything, could carefully fold the gown and walk away. But something in her grandmother's spirit rose up within her. Queen Margaret had taught her never to bow before injustice, never to remain silent when something was wrong. This is Queen Margaret's coronation gown, Isabella said, her voice steadier than she felt. Why is it here? Lady Catherine stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. The click of the lock made Isabella's stomach turn. They were alone now, away from servants, away from guards, away from witnesses. You misunderstand what you are seeing, Lady Catherine said smoothly, moving closer. The gown was brought here for cleaning and preservation. I volunteered to oversee the process personally to ensure it received the care it deserved. The royal treasury has preservation experts, Isabella countered. They have climate-controlled vaults and professional conservators. Why would it be in your personal wardrobe? Lady Catherine's expression shifted. The pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. You are young, Isabella. You do not understand how these matters work. Sometimes things must be moved quietly without drawing attention. Your grandmother's death left many administrative details unresolved. I am simply helping resolve them. Isabella knew she was lying. Everything about this felt wrong. The way Lady Catherine blocked the door, the way her eyes kept darting to the gown, the tension radiating from her like heat from a flame. I think the king should know about this, Isabella said carefully. I think the royal treasury should be informed. I think you should be very careful about making accusations, Lady Catherine replied, her voice dropping to something almost threatening. You are grieving. Everyone knows how close you were to Margaret. Perhaps the stress has become too much. Perhaps you are seeing conspiracies where none exist. The implication was clear. Lady Catherine was suggesting Isabella was unstable, that her grief had driven her to paranoia. It was a clever strategy. Who would believe the heartbroken princess over the new queen consort? But Isabella had not survived palace politics for 23 years by being naive. She knew what she had found. She knew what it meant. And she knew that walking out of this room would be the most dangerous thing she had ever done. I will speak to my uncle, Isabella said firmly, moving toward the door. Lady Catherine did not move aside. Before you do something you will regret, perhaps we should discuss this more privately. There are aspects to this situation you do not fully comprehend. Isabella's blood ran cold. What aspects? What could possibly justify hiding the former queen's coronation gown? The tension in Lady Catherine's chamber felt suffocating. Isabella stood clutching her grandmother's coronation gown while the new queen consort blocked her exit. Every instinct screamed at Isabella to run, to call for guards, to expose this bizarre secret immediately. But something held her back. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the faint hope that some reasonable explanation existed. Or perhaps it was the frightening realization that she might be in real danger. What aspects? Isabella asked, keeping her voice level despite the fear coursing through her veins. Lady Catherine studied her for a long moment, as if calculating how much to reveal. Finally, she moved away from the door and walked to the window, gazing out at the palace gardens below. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that had not been there before. Your grandmother was not the saint everyone believed she was, Lady Catherine said quietly. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. How dare you speak of her that way? Speak only truth, Lady Catherine continued, still facing the window. Queen Margaret made promises before she died. Promises that certain individuals would be protected, that certain secrets would remain buried. But she also made arrangements that contradicted those promises. Isabella felt confusion mixing with her anger. What are you talking about? What promises? Lady Catherine turned to face her. The coronation gown you hold is worth more than its historical significance. Sewn into the lining are documents, letters, evidence, of agreements made during Margaret's reign that would shake this kingdom to its foundations if they became public. Isabella's hands tightened on the fabric. I do not believe you.
Act for yourself, Lady Catherine challenged.
Along the inner seam of the train, there is a hidden pocket. Your grandmother was clever. She knew that no one would ever alter or damage the coronation gown. It was the perfect hiding place. Against her better judgment, Isabella examined the train. Her fingers found the seam Lady Catherine described. And there, carefully concealed beneath layers of silk, was a narrow opening. She reached inside and felt the crinkle of paper. Her stomach dropped. What is this? Isabella whispered. Insurance, Lady Catherine replied. Queen Margaret kept documentation of every political compromise, every secret alliance, every favor traded during her reign. She claimed it was to protect the monarchy, to ensure no one could challenge the throne with lies. But it was also leverage, power, She could destroy reputations with those papers if anyone crossed her. Isabella's mind reeled. This could not be true. Her grandmother was kind, was just, was everything a monarch should be. Yet Isabella had spent enough time in palace politics to know that ruling required difficult choices, compromises, sometimes even deception for the greater good. Why do you have the gown? Isabella demanded. Even if what you say is true, why steal it from the treasury? I did not steal it, Lady Catherine said sharply. Your grandmother gave it to me before she died. The claim seemed absurd. Why would she give you anything? You are not even at court then. That is what everyone believes, Lady Catherine said with a bitter smile. But Margaret and I knew each other for years. She arranged my introduction to King Edward. She orchestrated our entire courtship because she knew she was dying and wanted someone she could trust in this position. Isabella shook her head in disbelief. No, my uncle chose you. The council approved the marriage. Your uncle chose exactly whom Margaret told him to choose, Lady Catherine corrected. She spent her final months ensuring the transition of power would go smoothly. Part of that meant placing someone loyal to her memory in the position of queen consort, someone who would protect her legacy by hiding evidence. Isabella challenged. By preventing it from being weaponized, Lady Catherine countered. There are people in this kingdom who would love nothing more than to tear down Margaret's reputation. Political rivals, foreign powers, even some within this very palace. If those documents became public before the proper time, the chaos would be catastrophic. Isabella's thoughts churned. Part of her wanted to dismiss everything as manipulation. But another part, the part trained in royal strategy since childhood, recognized the brutal logic. Her grandmother had always been 10 steps ahead of everyone else, planning for contingencies no one else even considered. What is the proper time? Isabella asked carefully. When King Edward's position is secure, Lady Catherine explained. When the political landscape has stabilized, when we can control the narrative around any revelations. Margaret left specific instructions. The documents are to be reviewed by a trusted council in 5 years, then either destroyed or archived based on their continued relevance. And you expect me to just trust you with this? Isabella's skepticism remained sharp. I expect you to honor your grandmother's wishes, Lady Catherine replied. She loved you more than anything in this world. Everything she did was to protect you, to protect this family, to protect the crown. If you expose this now, you will undo years of careful planning. You will invite investigations, scandals, political turmoil. Is that what Margaret would have wanted? Isabella felt torn in two. Her instinct was to trust nothing this woman said. Yet the existence of the hidden documents was undeniable. And it was true that her grandmother operated in ways that often seemed mysterious, even to those closest to her. Margaret played a long game, always thinking decades ahead. I want to read them, Isabella said suddenly. The documents. If they exist, if they are what you claim, I want to see them. Lady Catherine hesitated. That is not wise. I do not care about wisdom right now, Isabella shot back. If you want my cooperation, if you want my silence, then I need to understand what we are protecting. Show me the documents. The two women stared at each other, locked in a battle of wills. Finally, Lady Catherine nodded slowly. Very well. But not here, and not now. This evening, after the state dinner, meet me in the old library. The one in the North Tower that no one uses anymore. Come alone. How do I know this is not a trap? Isabella asked bluntly. Because if I wanted to harm you, I could have done so already. Lady Catherine replied coldly. You are alone in my chambers. No one knows you are here. I could claim you became hysterical with grief, that you attacked me, that I acted in self-defense. Your reputation for being devoted to Margaret would work against you. Everyone would believe the poor princess simply broke under the strain. The threat hung in the air like poison. Isabella realized with chilling clarity that Lady Catherine was right. She had walked into this situation with no protection, no witnesses, no leverage. 8 o'clock, Lady Catherine continued. The North Tower Library. I will bring the documents. You will read them, and then you will decide whether to trust me or destroy everything your grandmother worked to build. Isabella carefully folded the coronation gown and placed it back in the wardrobe. Her hands shook slightly, but she kept her expression neutral. 8 o'clock, she agreed. As she walked toward the door, Lady Catherine called out softly, "Isabella? Your grandmother's last words to me were about you. She said you had her strength but also her compassion. She said that combination would either save the kingdom or destroy it. I suppose we will find out which tonight." Isabella left without responding. As she walked through the palace corridors, her mind raced with possibilities, with fears, with terrible questions. Had her grandmother truly orchestrated all of this? Was Lady Catherine telling the truth or weaving an elaborate lie? And most frightening of all, what would those hidden documents reveal? She had 7 hours until the meeting. 7 hours to decide whether to trust the woman who had taken her grandmother's place. 7 hours to prepare for whatever truth awaited in the shadows of the old library. Isabella returned to her chambers and locked the door behind her. She needed to think. She needed to plan. And most of all, she needed to be ready for anything. The state dinner dragged on endlessly. Isabella sat at the high table, pushing food around her plate while making polite conversation with visiting dignitaries. Every minute felt like an hour. Her eyes kept drifting to the ornate clock on the wall, watching the hands creep toward 8 o'clock. Across the table, Lady Catherine appeared perfectly composed, laughing at jokes and charming foreign ambassadors with practiced ease. If she felt any anxiety about their upcoming meeting, she hid it masterfully. King Edward sat at the head of the table, looking tired and older than his 50 years. Grief had aged him rapidly. The death of his mother, the pressure of the crown, the weight of expectations, all showed in the lines around his eyes. He barely noticed Isabella's distraction, focused on his own conversations about trade agreements and diplomatic relations. Finally, mercifully, the dinner concluded. Guests retired to the drawing rooms for brandy and cigars. Isabella excused herself, claiming a headache. No one questioned it. Everyone knew she still struggled with her grandmother's absence. They expected her to retreat frequently, to need solitude to manage her sorrow. She made her way through the palace's winding corridors toward the North Tower. This section of the palace was rarely used anymore. The old library had once been a center of royal scholarship, filled with ancient texts and historical documents. But modern renovations had created new, more accessible libraries elsewhere in the palace. Now the North Tower stood mostly forgotten. It's maintained but unloved. The climb up the tower stairs made Isabella's heart pound. Though she could not tell if it was from exertion or anxiety, she had considered telling someone about this meeting. Considered bringing a guard, a friend, anyone for protection. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the desire to understand before acting. Perhaps it was the fear that Lady Catherine's threats held weight. Or perhaps it was simple curiosity. The need to know what secrets her grandmother had kept. The library door stood slightly ajar. Warm lamplight spilled into the dark hallway. Isabella took a deep breath and stepped inside. The old library was exactly as she remembered from childhood. Visits with Queen Margaret. Floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with leather-bound volumes. A massive fireplace where a small fire now crackled. Heavy velvet curtains drawn across tall windows. And in the center of the room, a reading table where Lady Catherine sat with a wooden box placed before her. "You came," Lady Catherine said, looking up. "I was not entirely certain you would. I need to understand," Isabella replied, closing the door behind her. "I need to know if my grandmother really did this." Lady Catherine gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit, read, judge for yourself." Isabella approached cautiously, her eyes fixed on the wooden box. It was ornately carved with the royal seal and looked very old. Lady Catherine opened it carefully, revealing bundles of letters tied with ribbon, each bundle labeled with dates and names. "These are organized by topic," Lady Catherine explained. "Political alliances, financial agreements, personal correspondences." "Your grandmother was meticulous in her record-keeping." Isabella reached for the nearest bundle. The label read, "Northern Rebellion to 1998. Her hands trembled as she untied the ribbon and unfolded the first letter. It was written in her grandmother's distinctive handwriting, addressed to a general whose name Isabella recognized from history books as she read. Her blood ran cold. The letter detailed a secret agreement to allow rebel leaders to escape prosecution in exchange for their public surrender. Queen Margaret had promised amnesty, then quietly arranged for certain individuals to disappear rather than face trial. The official story told to the public had been complete fabrication. "This is treason," Isabella whispered. "This is pragmatism," Lady Catherine corrected. The rebellion would have torn the kingdom apart if it continued. Hundreds more would have died. Margaret ended it the only way she could, then protected those who helped her by ensuring no records existed of the real agreement. Isabella set down that bundle and reached for another. Economic reform minus 2005. These documents showed Margaret manipulating currency markets through secret agreements with foreign banks, technically legal perhaps, but ethically questionable. The profits had funded social programs that helped millions. But the methods would have caused scandal if revealed. Bundle after bundle told similar stories. Compromises made in shadows, deals struck that contradicted public statements, promises broken for the greater good. Each revelation chipped away at Isabella's image of her grandmother as the perfect queen. "She lied," Isabella said, her voice hollow. "About so many things," she ruled. Lady Catherine replied firmly, "There is a difference between personal honesty and political necessity." Margaret understood that sometimes leaders must do questionable things to achieve righteous outcomes. She made hard choices so her people would not have to suffer the consequences of idealistic rigidity. Isabella wanted to argue, wanted to defend her grandmother's honor, but the evidence sat before her in Queen Margaret's own handwriting. These were not forgeries or exaggerations. They were truth, raw and uncomfortable. "Why tell me this?" Isabella asked. "Why not just keep them hidden as my grandmother planned?" "Because you found the gown," Lady Catherine said. "Because you are not someone who accepts easy answers. If I had lied to you, you would have investigated. You would have told your uncle, triggered official inquiries, exposed everything prematurely. The only way to ensure your cooperation was through honesty. And what exactly do you want from me?" Lady Catherine leaned forward, her expression intense. "Your trust, your silence, and eventually your help. In 4.5 years, these documents must be reviewed by a council Margaret designated. She chose 3 people she trusted absolutely to decide their fate. I am one, you are another." Isabella's eyes widened. "Me? My grandmother chose me for this?" "She left very specific instructions," Lady Catherine confirmed. "She knew you would struggle with this burden. But she also believed you had the wisdom and strength to handle it. The 3rd member of the council was to be revealed only when the time came. Who is it?" "I do not know," Lady Catherine admitted. Margaret sealed that information. "It will only be revealed when all 3 gather 5 years after her death." Another of her safeguards. Isabella's mind spun. Her grandmother had planned this elaborate system, had trusted her with secrets that could reshape history, had believed she would make the right choices. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing. "What if I refuse?" Isabella asked. "What if I take these documents to my uncle right now?" "Then you betray your grandmother's final wishes," Lady Catherine said simply. "You expose her compromises to people who will not understand the context. You allow her enemies to rewrite her legacy as that of a corrupt manipulator rather than a strategic leader. And you destabilize a kingdom that is still healing from her loss. You are asking me to become part of a conspiracy. I am asking you to honor an obligation," Lady Catherine countered. "Margaret protected you your entire life. She shaped you, educated you, loved you unconditionally. Now she needs you to protect her. Can you do that?" Isabella stood and walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames. Everything she thought she knew about her grandmother had shifted. Queen Margaret was not the simple figure of wisdom and kindness Isabella had believed. She was complex, capable of deception, willing to compromise her stated principles for outcomes she deemed necessary. But did that make her evil, or simply human? Isabella thought about the social programs funded by those secret financial manipulations. the lives saved by ending the rebellion through backdoor deals, the stability maintained through careful political theater. If Margaret's methods were questionable, her results had been largely positive. The kingdom had prospered under her rule. People had lived better lives. "I need time," Isabella finally said. "I cannot make this decision tonight, I understand," Lady Catherine replied. "But I need your word that you will not speak of this to anyone until you decide." "Can you give me that?" Isabella turned to face her. "How do I know I can trust you? How do I know you are not using these documents for your own purposes?" "You do not," Lady Catherine admitted. "Trust must be earned. But consider this. If I wanted power for myself, I could have destroyed these documents and no one would ever know. I could have started fresh, created my own legacy without being tied to Margaret's shadow. Instead, I am honoring her wishes, protecting her reputation, following her plan. Does that not suggest my motivations align with hers?" It was a fair point. Isabella studied Lady Catherine's face, searching for signs of deception, but the woman's expression remained open, almost vulnerable. "1 week," Isabella said. "Give me 1 week to process this, to think through the implications. Then I will give you my answer." 1 week, Lady Catherine agreed. She began carefully returning the documents to the wooden box, but Isabella, understand that this burden does not get lighter with time. The knowledge you now carry will weigh on you every day. There is no escaping what you have learned. Isabella knew she was right. She could never unknow these truths about her grandmother, could never return to the simple faith she had in Queen Margaret's perfection. That innocence was gone forever as she turned to leave. Lady Catherine spoke once more. "Your grandmother loved you more than anything. Whatever you decide, never doubt that. Every cho." Sleep refused to come. Isabella lay in her bed, staring at the canopy above, her mind endlessly replaying everything she had discovered. The coronation gown hidden in Lady Catherine's wardrobe, the document sewn into its lining, her grandmother's careful handwriting detailing compromises and deceptions. The weight of secrets that now pressed down on her chest like a physical force. By dawn, she had made no progress toward a decision. She dressed mechanically, attending her morning duties in a fog of exhaustion and confusion. At breakfast, King Edward asked if she was feeling well. She lied smoothly, blaming poor sleep on the changing weather. He accepted the explanation without question, distracted by his own concerns. To probe deeper, Isabella spent the next 3 days in a state of carefully controlled chaos. Publicly, she maintained her normal routine, attending council meetings, visiting charitable organizations, fulfilling her royal obligations with practiced grace. Privately, she was unraveling. Every interaction with Lady Catherine felt loaded with hidden meaning. Every mention of Queen Margaret sent waves of conflicting emotion through her heart. She found herself wandering the palace at odd hours, visiting places associated with her grandmother, the private chapel where Margaret had prayed each morning, the rose garden she had personally designed, the study where she had taught young Isabella about history, politics, and the responsibilities of royal blood. In that study, Isabella discovered something that shifted her perspective once again. She was looking through old books on a shelf, seeking comfort in familiar objects, when a photograph slipped from between the pages. It showed Queen Margaret as a young woman, perhaps in her 30s, standing with a group of men in military uniforms. The photo was informal, taken at what appeared to be a private meeting rather than an official function. Isabella turned it over. On the back, in her grandmother's handwriting, "Northern negotiations, the day we chose peace over principle. May God forgive us." The date matched the Northern Rebellion documents Isabella had read in the old library. This photograph was from the moment those controversial decisions were made, and her grandmother's words suggested she had struggled with those choices, had understood their moral complexity, had carried the weight of compromising her principles. It humanized everything. Margaret was not a calculating manipulator who coldly deceived her people. She was someone who made difficult choices and lived with the burden of them. Someone who understood the cost of leadership. Isabella tucked the photograph into her pocket and continued searching. Over the next 2 days, she found more evidence of her grandmother's inner life. Journal entries describing sleepless nights worrying about whether her decisions were right. letters to trusted advisors questioning her own judgment, prayer books with passages underlined that spoke of seeking forgiveness for necessary sins. Queen Margaret had not been perfect, but she had been aware of her imperfections. She had tried to balance idealism with reality, principles with pragmatism, and she had suffered for it, carrying guilt and doubt that she never showed publicly. On the 5th day after the library meeting, Isabella received an unexpected visitor. Lord Ashford, her grandmother's former chief advisor, requested a private audience. He was an elderly man now, tired from court life but still respected for his wisdom and decades of service to the crown. They met in the palace's conservatory, surrounded by exotic plants and the sound of a small fountain. Lord Ashford moved slowly, his aged body failing even as his mind remained sharp. "You have been troubled, Your Highness," he observed, after they exchanged pleasantries. "I have known you since you were a child. I recognize the signs of someone carrying a burden too heavy to share." Isabella considered denying it, but decided against deception. "Did you know about my grandmother's methods? The compromises she made?" Lord Ashford's expression grew thoughtful. "I knew Queen Margaret better than most. I was aware that she sometimes operated in ways that would not stand up to public scrutiny. But I also knew her heart, her intentions, her genuine desire to serve her people well." "She lied," Isabella said bluntly, "about important things. To everyone," she protected. Lord Ashford corrected gently. "There is a difference, though I acknowledge it is a fine line. Leadership sometimes requires keeping difficult truths from those who would be harmed by them. Your grandmother understood that pure transparency, while morally appealing, can be practically disastrous." "Is that what you told yourself?" Isabella challenged. "To justify helping her deceive people?" "No," Lord Ashford said firmly. "I told myself that I served a queen who made hard choices so others would not suffer the consequences of easy ones. I told myself that her compromises prevented wars, saved lives, and maintained stability during turbulent times. I told myself that judging her required understanding the full context of her decisions, not just their surface appearance." Isabella sank into a chair, feeling tears threatening. "I do not know what to do with this knowledge. I do not know how to honor her memory when I now see how flawed she was." Lord Ashford sat beside her, his weathered hand gently covering hers. "Child, every human is flawed. Every leader more so, because their flaws have greater consequences. Your grandmother was not a saint. She never claimed to be, but she was good. She loved her people. She sacrificed her own peace of mind, her own moral comfort, to do what she believed was necessary for the kingdom's welfare." "Lady Catherine says I am supposed to help protect these secrets," Isabella confessed. "That my grandmother chose me to be part of a council that will decide their fate." Lord Ashford nodded slowly. "I suspected something like that existed. Margaret was too careful to leave such matters unresolved. And she trusted you more than anyone. Why me? Why burden me with this?" "Because you have something rare," Lord Ashford explained. "You have both the strength to bear hard truths and the compassion to understand why people make imperfect choices. Your grandmother saw that in you. She knew you would not judge her harshly without first trying to understand her perspective. But what if I cannot carry this?" Isabella whispered. "What if I fail her?" "Then you fail her," Lord Ashford said simply. "That is the risk of trust. But I do not believe you will. I believe you will find a way to honor both her memory and your own principles. That is what she raised you to do." After Lord Ashford left, Isabella felt something shift inside her. The weight remained, but it no longer felt crushing. Instead, it felt like responsibility, like purpose. Her grandmother had trusted her with this burden because she believed Isabella could handle it. And perhaps, in her own way, Margaret was still teaching her lessons about leadership and the complex reality of doing good in an imperfect world. That evening, Isabella requested a private meeting with Lady Catherine. They met in the same drawing room where they had first clashed, though the atmosphere now felt different. Less adversarial. More like two people united by a common obligation. "I have made my decision," Isabella said without preamble. Lady Catherine straightened, tension visible in her shoulders. "And I will honor my grandmother's wishes," Isabella stated. I will serve on the council when the time comes. I will help decide what to do with those documents. But I have conditions. Name them first. I want complete transparency between us regarding these matters. No more secrets, no more hidden information. If I am to be part of this, I need to know everything, lady. Catherine nodded, agreed second. I want to understand your real relationship with my grandmother. Not the version you told me before? The full truth, lady. Catherine was silent for a long moment. That is more complicated than you might imagine. I have time, Isabella said. And I need to know who I am. Trusting very well, Lady Catherine agreed, but not here. Some stories require privacy and time to tell properly. Come to my chambers tomorrow evening. I will tell you everything. Isabella studied her carefully. How do I know you will be honest? You do not, Lady Catherine replied, but I think you are. Beginning to understand that sometimes we must trust people despite our doubts. Not because we have eliminated them. It was an echo of something Queen Margaret used to say. Isabella felt a strange jolt of recognition. Seeing her grandmother's influence in this woman she had initially distrusted so completely. Tomorrow evening. Then Isabella agreed as she left. She felt lighter than she had in days. She had made a choice. Committed to a path. There would still be challenges ahead, still difficult decisions to make, still moments of doubt and fear. But she was no longer paralyzed by uncertainty. She walked through the palace halls toward her chambers, passing portraits of queens and kings who had ruled before her grandmother. Each of them had faced their own trials, made their own compromises, carried their own secrets. Leadership was never simple. Power was never clean. And legacy was always more complicated than the stories people told. But perhaps that was the real lesson. Queen Margaret had wanted her to learn that doing good in the world required accepting moral complexity, that perfect virtue was impossible for those who actually wielded power, and that honor lay not in avoiding difficult choices, but in making them thoughtfully, with care for their consequences. And with willingness to accept their burden, Isabella was beginning to understand her grandmother in a new way. Not as the idealized figure she had worshipped, but as a real woman who had struggled, who had doubted. The following evening, Isabella arrived at Lady Catherine's chambers precisely at the appointed time. The Queen Consort answered the door herself, having dismissed her servants for privacy. She looked different than usual, less formally dressed, her hair loose around her shoulders. More vulnerable somehow. More human. They sat in comfortable chairs by the fireplace, and Lady Catherine poured them both wine. For a moment neither spoke, the silence heavy with anticipation. Where should I begin? Lady Catherine asked finally. The beginning, Isabella replied. How you really met my grandmother. Lady Catherine took a long sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. I was 19 years old, working as a junior assistant in the Foreign Office. Nobody important, just another young person trying to build a career in government service. Then one day, I was asked to compile briefing documents for a royal visit. Standard work, nothing special. Except Queen Margaret herself reviewed the documents and requested to meet whoever had prepared them. Why? I still do not know, Lady Catherine admitted. Perhaps she saw something in my work. Perhaps it was chance. But we met, and she asked me questions about my background, my education, my ambitions. I was terrified, of course, speaking directly with the Queen, but she was kind, interested, genuinely curious about my thoughts on various policy matters. That sounds like her, Isabella said softly. It became a pattern, Lady Catherine continued. Every few months, she would request my presence at some small function or ask me to prepare additional materials. Always casual, never formal. I thought perhaps she was simply being kind to a young person trying to advance. But eventually I realized she was mentoring me, teaching me about politics, about palace dynamics, about the realities of power. How long did this continue? 8 years, Lady Catherine said. 8 years of irregular, but consistent contact. I advanced in my career partly through merit and partly through her discreet influence. She never promised me anything, never suggested any particular future. But she was grooming me for something. I just did not understand what. Lady Catherine paused, staring into the fire. Then, 3 years ago, she asked me to visit her privately at her country estate. That was when she told me she was dying. Cancer. Aggressive and inoperable. She had perhaps 2 years, the doctors said. She had not told anyone else yet. Not even King Edward. Isabella felt tears welling. She kept that secret for so long? She wanted to prepare, Lady Catherine explained. She knew her death would create instability. King Edward was not ready to rule alone. He had always relied on her guidance, her political instincts. Without her, Margaret feared he would make mistakes that could damage the monarchy. So she created a plan. Marrying you to my uncle, Isabella said, understanding dawning. But it was more than just an arranged marriage. Margaret spent the next 2 years teaching me everything she knew about ruling, about managing court politics, about supporting a king who doubted himself. She shared her strategies, her contacts, her methods, including the existence of those documents. Did you love my uncle when you married him? Isabella asked bluntly. Lady Catherine met her gaze steadily. I respected him. I cared for him. Love came later after the wedding. But I was honest with Edward from the beginning about Margaret's involvement in bringing us together. He understood that it was part of her plan for the transition, and he accepted that. Your uncle is not a proud man, Lady Catherine said gently. He knows his limitations. He appreciated his mother trying to protect him, even from beyond the grave. The marriage has grown into something genuine. We work well together. We support each other. That is more than many royal marriages can claim. Isabella considered this. It was manipulative, certainly, but also pragmatic. Queen Margaret had used her final years to create stability for those she would leave behind. In her own way, it was an act of love. What about the documents? Isabella asked. Why involve me in protecting them? Because Margaret knew I could not do it alone, Lady Catherine admitted. I am an outsider. I lack the deep connections to the royal family that would give me credibility if questions arose. But you, her beloved granddaughter, raised by her hand, educated in her principles, you have legitimacy I can never possess. Together, we can protect her legacy. Separately, we are vulnerable. So this was always about partnership, Isabella realized. She forced us to work together by making us both necessary to her plan. Your grandmother understood people, Lady Catherine said with a slight smile. She knew you would distrust me. Knew I would need your cooperation. So she created a situation where we had no choice but to find common ground. It was brilliant in its way. Manipulative, yes, but brilliant. Queen Margaret had seen the potential conflicts and designed a solution that turned adversaries into allies. Even in death, she was still playing the long game. There is one thing I still do not understand, Isabella said. The third member of the council. Who is it? I genuinely do not know, Lady Catherine replied. Margaret sealed those instructions. But I have theories. It is likely someone who served her for many years. Someone she trusted absolutely. Someone with wisdom to balance our perspectives. Lord Ashford, Isabella suggested. Possible. Or perhaps someone unexpected. We will not know until the designated time. Isabella sat back, processing everything. The woman she had initially seen as an interloper, threat to her grandmother's memory, was actually Margaret's carefully chosen successor. Not as queen, that role remained King Edward's, but as the guardian of complicated truths and difficult secrets. I still have reservations, Isabella admitted, about the methods my grandmother used. About the lies she told, as you should, Lady Catherine agreed. Blind loyalty serves no one. Your grandmother did not want you to mindlessly accept everything she did. She wanted you to understand it, to question it, and ultimately to make your own judgments about what should be preserved and what should be revealed. That is a heavy burden to place on someone. It is the burden of leadership, Lady Catherine said. Your grandmother carried it for 50 years. Now, she is asking you to share it, in your own way. Isabella thought about the photograph she had found. About her grandmother's prayer books with their underlined passages about forgiveness and necessary compromises. Queen Margaret had not been comfortable with her choices. She had struggled, had doubted, had sought moral guidance even as she made pragmatic decisions. That struggle mattered. It meant the compromises came from anguish, not callousness. from difficult calculation, not casual disregard for truth, and it meant Isabella could honor her memory without pretending she had been perfect. "I will do this," Isabella said. "Finally, I will serve on the council. I will help protect what needs protecting and reveal what needs revealing. But I do it for the kingdom. Not blind loyalty to my grandmother's wishes, that is all Margaret would have wanted," Lady Catherine assured her. "She raised you to think independently, to put the realm's welfare above personal sentiment. You were honoring her by refusing to simply obey without judgment." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn low. An understanding had formed between them, born of shared obligation and mutual respect. They would likely never be close friends. Too much separated them: age, background, history. But they could be effective partners in protecting something larger than themselves. "What happens now?" Isabella asked eventually. "Why," Lady Catherine replied, 4.5 more years until the council convenes. In that time, we continue our normal lives. We support King Edward. We fulfill our duties. And we keep each other's trust stand. The coronation gown returns to the royal treasury next week," Lady Catherine said, "with appropriate documentation showing it underwent preservation work under my supervision. No one will question it. And the documents will be secured elsewhere, in a location only the council members will know. Was neat, organized, thought through. Queen Margaret's fingerprints were all over the plan. She had anticipated every detail, prepared for every contingency." Isabella stood to leave. At the door, she turned back. "Did my grandmother ever express doubt about whether this plan would work?" Lady Catherine smiled sadly. "Every time we spoke about it. She worried constantly that she was asking too much, that she was making mistakes, that everything would fall apart. But she went forward anyway, because she believed it was necessary. That was her gift and her curse, seeing what needed to be done and having the strength to do it despite the doubt." Isabella nodded, understanding flooding through her. Her grandmother had not been a fearless leader who never questioned herself. She had been a frightened human doing her best in impossible circumstances. That made her sacrifices more meaningful, not less. As Isabella walked back to her chambers that night, she felt different, older, somehow, wiser. The simple worldview of her youth was gone, replaced by understanding of nuance and complexity. She knew things now that she could never unknow, carried burdens she could never set down, but she also felt connected to her grandmother in a new way, not as a child worshipping an idol, but as one leader to another, across the gap of death. Queen Margaret had prepared her for this moment without Isabella even realizing it. All those lessons about history, politics, ethics, and responsibility had been building toward this revelation. In her chambers, Isabella retrieved the photog,